Okay, we're getting close to the end of the course here. This is chapter 10. We're going to talk about online content and media, something that all of us, I shouldn't assume all of us, I suppose, but most of us are using quite frequently these days, especially with the whole COVID situation. So the first thing let's talk about is broadcast media on the internet. And kind of give you I like to give historical pictures, certainly not going to be tested, but I think it's helpful to give some context here for where this all began. And so uh, having the ability to do media on a computer has been around since the 1990s, around the, let's say, 1991, 1992 timeframe or so. You could watch a video on your computer. Things like trailers were things that you could have on your computer. They were distributed on a CD-ROM, and you could watch very primitive movies in a very small window. Okay? And then as the internet developed, technologies were developed to support video as a streaming service. And so Real Networks was, I believe, the first service that allowed you to stream over the internet, and that was mostly things like what we would see on YouTube today. Funny videos. I remember my first job, people passing around funny videos of things on the internet, and we had to have Real Network software on our computer in order to watch them. Then Microsoft came out with their version of a media player, and Apple had QuickTime, and other platforms like that. But what this allowed is anybody to go and produce a video and post a video. And so, as a predecessor to even YouTube, we would have people who would post this sort of thing on their websites and stream that type of media. And not just video media, by the way, also audio media. So in its infancy, we had audio streaming as well from Real Networks. And so radio stations, terrestrial radio stations, would use platforms like Real Networks to stream their broadcast over the internet. So one of the first use cases for this online media content was actually, in fact, the radio stations. And I remember, I think around 1998, I moved up to the Bay Area, and I started a job up there, but I loved a radio station in San Diego. And I loved their morning show. Well, I was able to listen to it online because they had it through Real Network streaming, so I could actually listen to the radio station that I was familiar with. Okay. Now, fast forward, technology's improved, and we started seeing other players come in and start doing streaming services. But we didn't really see the big networks do a whole lot of streaming until within the last 10, 15 years or so. We started seeing a huge amount of streaming of major channels and whatnot. And in the last couple of years, we've seen the growth of these streaming services. If you look back to the start of iTunes, that was the start of streaming music and movies that you purchased. But it wasn't a streaming service like we have today. You didn't pay a subscription for it. You paid for every movie, music, TV show that you downloaded. Okay. And so we've shifted away from that, and we've shifted to a model where we have companies like Apple, companies like Google with the YouTube paid services. We've had, obviously, the YouTube launch about 15 years ago or so. That provided a lot of content in an easy to consume manner, and the amount of video just skyrocketed from there. But then we also have things like Netflix. Netflix shifted from being a DVD rental service to a streaming service. And now far fewer people subscribe to Netflix for the DVDs than do for streaming. But at one point, their main business was DVDs. As internet connections got better, it enabled people to do more streaming. We have services like HBO, Cinemax, Showtime, CBS All Access being an all web-based platform as opposed to the regular CBS. The normal national broadcast channels, the NBCs, ABCs, all have their own streaming services. Peacock, Hulu, Disney Plus. Okay, a lot of new services available for streaming. Then we also have broadcast TV on the internet, which is things like Sling TV, AT&T, DirecTV Now. Um, what's the one that I have? Philo, Philo, is one for doing streaming of certain TV channels. Um, so there's a lot of different providers of media content, and it's grown exponentially. I just was reading an article in either the Washington Post or New York Times, I don't recall which, but anyhow, it was in one of those, and it was about Disney's earnings. And Disney's not doing so well right now. They're operating at a significant loss. They're laying off something like 32,000 people by March. Okay. But the one bright spot in their earnings was the Disney Plus service, which just launched earlier this year and has already garnered millions of viewers who are paying for that service. Now, I suppose you could say that not all of them are paying for this service. Some of them are paying for services through a provider, and there's a partnership where Disney Plus gets some sort of revenue, I would imagine, from that. So, for example, Verizon customers, certain plans, you get the Disney Plus free. That's how we have it. So, Disney Plus is getting some revenue from that, but it's also growing partnerships through existing relationships that customers have, so they can more quickly grow that base. All right. So now we've shifted to this model of streaming, and so a lot of people have become what's called cord cutters. So they no longer pay for cable TV, no longer pay for satellite TV, no longer watch broadcast TV. They watch what they want when they want to watch it, and they pay for a service to do so. Okay. As part of that, we've seen unique content created for these different services. So in addition to owning libraries of existing content, some of these platforms have unique content available that's not available anywhere else. So Netflix had House of Cards, Orange is the New Black. Oh my gosh, what's the other one that they had? Stranger Things, The Crown. Okay, these are all hit shows that historically would have been produced by major Hollywood studios. Okay? Instead, now they're being produced by these streaming services. On HBO, you had The Sopranos, The Wire, and a number of other series. Okay? And then you had Amazon. Okay? Amazon started coming out with its own service, its own original series as well. I wish I could think of some of those, but I can't. Sorry. And then you had Hulu, okay, had its own series, and then there's a number of other channels that are creating their own original content. Okay, so content creation is a very big deal and a very big moneymaker for organizations. Now, not only the streaming and the streaming content that we have, but there's also all sorts of other content across the internet as well. So the revenue for online content in general was around $60 billion, okay, as of 2018. It's probably a bit higher now. Okay. And so this is a pretty significant amount of content if you look back to the early days of the internet, when you could barely get people to pay for content, a penny for something, right? Or 10 cents or whatever it would be. Content wasn't very valuable back then. Now, today we spend a lot of time consuming online content. If we look at the pattern of individuals just walking down the street. I visited my grandmother recently and helped her get set up with a smartphone, and she kept making a comment about she didn't want to become one of those people who does this all day, that they're sitting at the table with people and they're doing this. They're all on their own devices. We're constantly consuming content. So particularly if you come up with mobile-friendly content, you're very likely to be able to get those eyeballs and capture those eyeballs. I'm a bit of, an exception to the rule here, but I spend very little time in front of my phone. I spend more time in front of my computers. All right, let's talk about some of the new things that have come about with technology and content and media. So the cable industry is hurting as a result of all of the cord cutting. Okay? Satellite, same thing. So we've seen some consolidation in those industries. We've seen those industries branch out into new areas as well. Okay. All right. We've seen ebooks. It's slowed down a bit. Okay. It's not where a lot of people thought ebooks would be, and I think part of that comes from the ebook experience is just not great. Uh, the Nook, the Kindle, the experience is okay, but not the same as flipping through a physical book. The best platform I saw was a platform I don't recall what it was called, but I used it a number of years ago when I was in law school for the iPad, and it had some textbooks in a very interactive manner. That's a great use case for ebook technology, where you've got not just the text on the screen, but let's just say it's a chemistry book, and the chemistry book, when you go read on, what a sodium molecule looks like, you actually can pull it up out of the book and interact with the molecule on your screen and learn more about it that way. That's where ebooks can really, I think, drive value from a content perspective. But for just everyday reading a novel or something, there's something about paper that most people prefer. So it's been challenging for the ebook market to really get their content to take off. Now, that being said, the magazine and newspaper market has had to shift to electronic formats. People consume that type of information online, and so Apple News, for example, Apple News Plus has all those magazines and newspapers that you can look at on your iPad. I make use of that, not every day, but almost every day. I make use of that technology, and I prefer it that way. Something about having to open up a big newspaper and flip through it, and then you got the ink all over your fingers and things like that, and then trying to get the damn thing to fold back up afterwards. So I don't particularly enjoy that. Plus, if I want to read something like that, I tend to be in a location where I'm not able to bring an entire library of magazines with me or newspapers. I tend to be on an airplane or tend to be, waiting somewhere. It's nice to be able to pull it up on my phone or tablet and be able to read that information to keep me occupied. Okay. Music. So we used to spend a lot of money on, a long time ago, before my time, records, cassette tapes, during my time, CDs, during my time, iTunes and other MP3 purchase platforms. And then we did this shift to streaming music. And so now we've got things like Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, etc. These allow us to have an unlimited library of songs in our pocket for a fixed cost per month. And some of these are incredibly affordable or even free. So it's really grown in that regard. We spend a lot more on digital music now than we did on physical music. Okay, and we spend more on streaming music than we do on downloadable music. All right. Gaming. So this is an area that's still pretty new. We have those consoles that are available, like Xbox and PlayStation and things like that, that allow you to play games in a kind of a controlled environment with specialized hardware. So for certain games, it's very very helpful to have that type of hardware. And I would imagine that many of you play that type of game where you do require that hardware. But where the real growth is in mobile gaming, and so we are starting to see better games come out for our mobile phones and our tablets and things like that. We're starting to actually see subscription services take off. I don't have any data on this, but you see things like Apple Arcade and other online gaming platforms. Frankly, I was not impressed with Apple Arcade. I gave it a shot, but now it's included free with the Apple One subscription. So, I have it, I don't use it, but that counts towards the subscription numbers for these companies in terms of growth. Okay. Um, we've got ecosystems developing. So you've got the Android ecosystem with Google platforms. You've got the Amazon ecosystem. You've got the Apple ecosystem. And this is driving online entertainment content, home automation, personal assistance, etc. Okay. So you've got these platforms that are building things for a wide variety of interests and having this integration between them. And we see that as these companies develop new versions of their technologies. So in my case, I have an Apple ecosystem for the most part in my home, and with what is the name of the version of macOS that just came out? It's escaping me right now. But the new version of macOS that just came out has this ability to do interfaces just like the iPhone. So it's becoming more of a seamless interface. When I open something on my phone, I can then transfer it to my computer. I can copy and paste things between them, which enables me to consume content on a device, recognize that I need a different device to better consume a particular type of content. So now I can switch to my laptop or my tablet or whatever I want to do. And even in cases of being able to switch, content from my phone to a HomePod speaker in my home to my TV, the TV then being able to send the sound channel through the HomePod. So there's a lot of possibilities that have developed. If we look at technology, so we've had phones just keep getting new features to take advantage of new technologies and consume more content. We've had tablets and we've had e-readers along with computers and TV streaming boxes and things like that. We have apps that have come about to help consume information and provide content. And then cloud has made it where we can consume an unlimited amount of content. It's very cheap for organizations to produce content with the cloud. It's also very effective for us. We don't have to have a huge capacity phone in order to consume cloud-based content now. Okay. We spend a lot of time on our devices, as I mentioned earlier. We spend very little time on a traditional television. And but we also have some challenges. And one challenge is net neutrality. And so basically net neutrality is this concept that all internet traffic should be treated equally. And a provider shouldn't be able to discriminate against that content simply because it didn't originate on their service. So a great example of this is, say, a cable company. The cable company provides content and they provide your internet connectivity. And so if they want to force you or encourage you with a strong arm to consume their TV content, they might favor their content over anybody else's content like Netflix or Hulu. So if you try to stream Netflix or Hulu without net neutrality, then there's nothing stopping the cable company from slowing down that traffic. With net neutrality, they're required to treat their traffic just like any other traffic, okay? Which means you have more choice. Now, net neutrality in the last 4 years, I forget what year it was, but it was under the current administration, was repealed. Okay. So we no longer have net neutrality, and there's nothing stopping vendor from forcing someone to pay more for Netflix to go through, like an add-on package, if you will, to your internet service. Yeah, you get your basic unlimited internet service, but if you want to be able to stream Netflix, that's another $10 a month. If you want to be able to do social media that's not, run by the cable company, that's another $5 a month. And so pretty soon you end up with a package just like the traditional cable packages, which, while very lucrative for these companies, are not necessarily great for the consumer. And this actually is the case in some countries already. So in some countries, you don't get unlimited data. You get unlimited data for email or something similar to that. If you want to have streaming at a good speed, you have to pay more for that service. it's not necessarily costing the vendor anymore to provide streaming services or anything else. It's just there's not a rule on the books. So I'm curious to see whether this will change with the administration change to go back to the previous rules where net neutrality did exist. Okay? It did lead to a lot of innovation for sure. All right. Media consumption in the U.S. Mostly digital these days, followed by TV. Very little radio, although there are some demographics where radio is still extremely popular, and you can see this with some areas, the channels that are available. Okay? They cater to a specific demographic. Newspapers, not so much anymore, and magazines, not so much anymore. If you see those types of things, typically it's shifted to digital content. Okay. Media revenues. So, entertainment is the biggest chunk of revenue, and then that's about 76%. And then print media is only about 24% these days. Okay. All right, let's move on. So, revenue models. So, how do you make money off your content? Well, there's numbers of ways that you can do this. Okay? You could do a subscription model. You could do a freemium model. You could do a free model where you ad support it. Okay? Many different ways in which you can monetize your content. All right? With respect to monetization, sometimes we see things like DRM or digital rights management or walled gardens. Okay? Walled gardens are a way to restrict the sharing of content. So, for example, if you buy a book from Amazon for a Kindle, it will only work in the Kindle app or on a Kindle device. Okay? Same if you do iBooks, it only works on Apple devices. Okay? DRM originally protected music like the iTunes music, but we've been in a non-DRM state for Apple Music for a while now. Okay. Netflix, Hulu, other platforms like that. That's like a walled garden as well. Okay, it's not. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not easy, and the quality is not great if you try to watch that content somewhere else. You could probably, if you're smart enough, you could probably figure out a way around it for a short period of time, but not likely to be super successful with it. We have seen with the last, 13 years or so since the iPhone came about, technological convergence. So, as Steve Jobs famously said when the iPhone came out, we're introducing 3 devices. It's an internet device, it's a telephone, and it's a music player. It's an internet device, a telephone, a music player. It's an internet device, a telephone, and music player all in one. Okay. We've also seen that with things like Apple TV. Okay. Now, we've seen content convergence as well, where the design, production, and distribution is handled by the same company. Historically, that wasn't the case. Okay. So now we see things like that with Netflix and Amazon and other providers. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about some of the things like media transformation of content, okay, and specifically around books. So in the mid-90s, when the internet was first developing, what you saw with respect to, say, books would be just a brochure about the books available from a publisher. Okay. Then you saw that book reformatted into a PDF so it could be displayed on the internet. Then we saw around the early to mid 2000s books that were designed as an interactive ebook. Okay. And now we've got this standard where mobile devices have the ability to pull up content, in other applications, okay? And it's fully integrated with the internet. Online publishing, newspapers have pretty much disappeared. There are a few still around. The most successful newspapers are the ones that have adopted digital and have robust digital content systems. So I'll call it a few examples, just because they're really great examples of digital content. Some of these also have really great deals for students. Okay, so I encourage you to not just get your news from the websites. Okay, it's always good to get your news from multiple sources and compare, because there is media bias out there from both sides of the aisle. Okay, so if you always fact check things and get your media from multiple sources, then you're less likely to have to worry about getting something that's, to quote the president, fake news, right? It could be coming from either side of the aisle, but still be coming from a website that might be not as reputable as others. Okay? So I like to check my sources against multiple places, including newspapers. Newspapers historically have done a good job of developing independent editing and things like that, where the journalism is very important to have fact-checked journalism. Okay, and so along those lines, what I've noticed is the newspapers that are most successful are those who have a strong digital platform. So the New York Times, Washington Post, both great examples of having a very strong digital platform. And I have gotten their physical newspapers in the past, but then I always run out of time and they end up piling up, so I stopped doing that. But I do enjoy reading those on my device. Okay, and both of them, I believe, have good programs for students who are interested in that. Could be as low as like $10 a year or something like that to get the newspaper. Where we've had a lot of newspapers die off are the local newspapers, and those who are less likely to have digital content. So to give you an example of, there's a local newspaper in the Inland Empire called the Press Enterprise. It's still around. I've never subscribed to the physical version of it. I occasionally go out there, but what really irritates me about them is you can't even get even bits and pieces of information for free. So I kind of get a little irritated by that, and so I just don't use that site and that platform. But a lot of small newspapers have actually gone out of business. So my hometown had a weekly newspaper when I was growing up, and it had been around since the 1800s. Okay? And it went away maybe about 10 years ago, because at the end there were only about 1,000 people subscribed to the print edition. And they had a website, but they didn't have the resources to really have a good website. So they had a crappy website, and the paper became pretty crappy, and they ended up going out of business. There are some slightly larger newspapers that, while they're still in business, they're a shell of what they used to be. And you can see there have been other newspapers in Riverside County, the Californian. I think they went under. They've been folded into, I think, the Union Tribune. But there used to be a Californian, which was for Riverside County, of the San Diego newspaper. Newspapers have been hit hard. Not only their circulation revenues remain flat, but their print ad revenue has plummeted because they can't charge as much when they don't have as many eyeballs. And the digital ad revenue on their website is just not enough to make up for the loss of the print revenue. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about, let's just take just a second to talk about some of the print newspapers out there. So if you look at the newspapers that are national in scope, the USA Today has the highest number of visitors, but they've also been a very, I would say, cutting-edge newspaper since the very beginning. I think they came about in the 1980s or something like that. New York Times, Washington Post, as I mentioned, very high digital content, very large audiences. New York Post, less so. Wall Street Journal, it surprises me, but a lot of people who read the Wall Street Journal You still get the paper version. So the people on Wall Street tend to read that. People in business. I used to get it. That's another one that as a student you can get a discount on, and sometimes you can get even the paper version delivered. It's very interesting to read. And then some of the other ones that follow up are like the Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, and then the San Francisco Chronicle. Okay. So where do people get their news online these days? Well, a lot of them get it from a news organization's website or mobile app, or social media. Those are the biggest two. Search engines, not so much. Maybe a text alert, a pop-up on your phone. And then a lot of people surprisingly get it from their friends and family still too. All right. Let's talk about some of the challenges of a revenue model. So we have the concept of a metered subscription where you get a limited number of articles for free, and then you have to pay something after that amount. And these companies are smart. They're, you try to log in from a different IP address or something. They have cookies on your computer and stuff, so they'll know it and they won't let you in. Okay. Then there's also the paywall model, and so Business Insider is an example of a paywall model. New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Some things they've given for free. So like the election coverage, they provided that as a service, but for free. But the subscription model, paywall, allows them to charge a subscription fee. And again, for students, the pricing is extremely cheap, so it might be worth looking at. All right. There are some pure pure digital competitors. So things like Yelp is content. Okay, it's restaurant reviews, business reviews, etc. All right. We also have some things like that are native digital. Things like Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Reddit. Okay. Reddit is an interesting site. Wouldn't really necessarily call it news, but it's user-generated content. Okay, so think of it, I guess, like a YouTube of textual content. Okay. Graphic content as well, I suppose. All right, let's move on. Magazines. So magazines kind of plateaued and then sunk, and they're on the rise again in a digital format. So an all-you-can-eat model, digital, through providers like the Apple News Plus I mentioned earlier. All the magazines that you otherwise might have subscribed to, you can get, all you can eat for a flat amount per month. And if you think about, how much each one of those magazines cost, if you go to the supermarket and you buy a couple per month, you pretty much paid for the cost of that Apple News Plus subscription. So, it can be a very lucrative deal for you in terms of entertainment value. Okay. Ebook publishing. For a while, there were a lot of different companies that were trying to disrupt the publishing market to allow you to self-publish. I can't remember what that one was called, but a friend of mine was CEO of a company that was doing self-publishing based on peer voting on things. So if you got enough people interested in your product, then you could get it published for a very low cost. And it was kind of like a crowdsource model. You not only got the support of votes, but you also got dollars tossed your way to help you fund your book publishing. But today you can publish through platforms like the Amazon ebook platform, etc. All right. I mentioned earlier the ecosystems like Amazon, Apple, Google for ebooks, all sorts of other media, movies, music, etc. Let's see what we want to talk about next here. Let's talk a bit about some of the services available out there. So purchase and download, renting things, that's the iTunes platform, Prime Video, Prime Video also offering a streaming option for subscribers to Amazon Prime. Okay, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, HBO Max, HBO Now, Cinemax, Showtime, Epix. All these have streaming services available. Okay. We have things like live TV. So Sling TV, DirecTV Now, Hulu with Live TV, YouTube TV, Sony, PlayStation View. So a variety of different live services for those who want to watch something that's live. We've got the content industry in general. Home entertainment, 67% is now digital. Only 33% is physical. Online TV, Netflix is obviously still the largest, but that might change. I don't have current numbers. This is from a few years ago. But following up in second place would be Hulu, third place Apple, fourth place Amazon, and then HBO Now, which is now HBO Now, HBO Max, HBO Go. All of those coming up in a close last place there. All right. And let's go ahead and see if we want to talk about anything else. I talked about music quite extensively. So, when the internet first became popularized, we had a big problem with piracy and illegal music sharing. And part of that was because the music industry just didn't get on board with the internet. And it was super easy for people to share music. You could pop a CD into your computer, and they came with software to digitize your CD collection. Well, once your CD collection is digitized, it was extremely easy for people to put that file on the internet. And so services like Napster developed to allow you to share music with others. Now, the first iteration of Napster crashed and burned as a result of recording industry lawsuits. This goes back to my earlier statements in this class of you don't want to steal other people's music. Okay? That's their content. So don't steal content. Pay for it. You don't have to pay for individual songs. Just subscribe to a service if you really like it. If you're stealing things, you're obviously hurting the record companies, and frankly, I don't give two craps about that so much. But you're hurting the artists who created the music. And if people are not getting paid for the content that they create, then people can't afford to be artists, and then content creation stops. So think of it like the Renaissance, where people would pay for painters and musicians and everything else to commission pieces. You can help with making sure that you stay above the board and pay for media that you consume. Okay. Now, not only is it a good thing to do from that what I already mentioned perspective, it's also an ethical thing to do. Okay, and as business students, you should all behave in an ethical manner. Okay, if I knew that you behaved unethically, I wouldn't hire you for any company that I was working for. Okay. All right, moving on. So digital revenue has far surpassed physical revenue, both in terms of music and video content. Okay. We have seen streaming really take off, and streaming is kind of gone on a hockey stick approach over the last 5 years or so. Okay. That's when streaming really took off. Online gaming, it's not as big as streaming video or audio, but it has substantially grown in the past in the past 7 years or so. So it's basically increased 6 times, so 600% in the last 6-7 years or so. Okay. All right. We've had mobile games that were hits like augmented reality. We have seen online services like what's the one? Steam and other services for video games. Then we've also seen things like Twitch for streaming video games. So now it's become a form of entertainment to watch someone else play a video game. Okay. Which when I first found that out, I was baffled by why someone would be entertained by watching someone else play a game, but clearly it's popular, and I'm sure some of you do that. Okay? But I still have a hard time understanding why that would be entertaining. I would only be entertained if I were playing the game myself. Okay, that's it for this chapter. So the next chapter is going to be on, refresh myself, social networks, auctions, and portals. Okay, and then the lecture after that, which will be, actually we'll combine the two together just to make it easier. We'll talk about supply chain management. Okay.